What happens when an arrogant alpha throws his mate into the freezing mud, branding her a barren curse so his pregnant mistress can take her place? He signs his own death warrant, because the alpha doesn't know two devastating secrets. First, he is completely sterile, and his discarded mate? She isn't barren at all. She is actually carrying the true heir of the terrifying Lycan King. Watch what happens when the most ruthless warlord in the Empire arrives in the blizzard, stepping over the bowing alpha to wrap his royal cloak around the exact girl they just threw away. The heavy ironwood doors of the pack house slammed shut, echoing like a death knell through the freezing courtyard. Elara hit the frozen mud hard. Her knees scraped against the jagged cobblestones, tearing the fabric of her white healer's cloak. The sharp, metallic tang of her own blood mixed with the bitter scent of the winter storm. But she did not cry out. She refused to give them that satisfaction. Above her, standing on the stone steps, was Alpha Thorne. He wore the thick fur mantle of the pack leader, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Beside him stood Vesper, draped in expensive crimson silks that offered no warmth, one hand resting theatrically over a slightly rounded belly. "You are a withered branch on a dying tree, Elara." Thorne's voice boomed over the howling wind. It was a voice designed to carry, ensuring that every member of the pack gathered in the courtyard heard his verdict. "For 3 winters, I allowed you to share my bed. For 3 winters, you gave this pack nothing but empty promises. The healer's bloodline is dead. You are a barren curse upon my lands," the pack murmured. Some looked away in shame. Others, who had actively sought Vesper's favor, sneered. Not a single warrior stepped forward. Not a single elder spoke in her defense. Elara knelt in the freezing mud, her fingers curling tightly around the small moonglass vial resting against her collarbone. It was the last heirloom of her mother, a true diagnostic tool of the ancient Oakhaven healers. It had not glowed for Thorne. It had remained as dead and cold as his affection. But lately, deep within her, there was a fluttering warmth, a strange, undeniable spark of life that had begun the night she treated a masked, wounded stranger at the border weeks ago. "Vesper carries my heir," Thorne declared, pulling the false Luna closer. "She has proven her worth in a matter of months. By the laws of the ancestors, I strip you of your rank, Elara. I strip you of your name. You are banished. If you are found within our borders by nightfall, you will be hunted as a rogue." "The child she carries is not yours, Thorne," Elara said. Her voice was not a scream. It was a quiet, steady truth that cut through the wind like a surgical blade. Thorne's face flushed with violent rage. "Silence! You dare speak lies against my Luna?" "I am a healer," Elara replied, finally lifting her chin to meet his furious gaze. Her forest green eyes were cold, calculating. "I know the scent of a true alpha's bloodline, and I know the scent of a lie." Vesper shrank back slightly, her fake confidence slipping for a fraction of a second. "Alpha, make her stop. Her jealousy is upsetting the baby." Thorne snarled, stepping down the stairs, his hand raising to strike her. He never landed the blow. A sound shook the earth. It was not thunder. It was the rhythmic, terrifying thud of armored hooves and heavy iron wheels. The pack parted like a panicked school of fish as a massive, armored carriage, pulled by 6 black dire steeds, rolled into the muddy courtyard. It bore the crest of the Frost Iron Empire. The entire pack froze. The sovereign ruler of the northern reaches, the Lycan King himself, was not expected for another moon cycle. Thorne immediately dropped to his knees, his arrogance vanishing into sheer terror. Vesper followed, trembling. The heavy iron door of the carriage swung open. King Kalen stepped out into the blizzard. He wore a dark iron-gray tunic and a heavy direwolf pelt. He did not look like a politician. He looked like a god of war who had just found a reason to kill. His piercing violet eyes swept over the kneeling pack, completely ignoring Thorne. Instead, his gaze locked instantly onto Elara. More specifically, his gaze locked onto the drops of blood on the snow from her scraped knees. A low, earth-shattering growl vibrated from the king's chest. It was a sound of primal, uncontrollable possessiveness that made every wolf in the courtyard whimper in submission. The scent of crushed sage and rain hit Kaelin's senses, cutting through the blizzard. The Lycan King began to walk toward the banished, bleeding girl. The heavy crunch of King Kaelin's boots against the frozen mud was the only sound in the courtyard. The blizzard raged around him, but the wind seemed to break against his massive frame, refusing to touch the Lycan King. Thorne remained on his knees, his forehead practically touching the dirt. He was trembling, completely misreading the lethal silence radiating from the sovereign. "Your Majesty," Thorne stammered, his voice cracking under the oppressive weight of Kaelin's alpha aura. "We did not expect you. I apologize for this unsightly display at my gates. This rogue is just leaving." Thorne shot a venomous glare at Elara, gesturing sharply with his hand. "Move, Barren trash! Do not pollute the king's path with your presence." Kaelin stopped. He was standing less than 2 feet from Elara. Slowly, the king turned his head to look down at Thorne. His violet eyes were completely devoid of warmth, glowing with a contained, terrifying violence. "Speak to her like that again." Kaelin's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that made the ground physically tremble. "And I will tear your tongue from your throat and feed it to my hounds." Thorne choked on his next breath, his eyes widening in pure shock. Beside him, Vesper whimpered, her hands instinctively flying to her fake belly, her face draining of all color. The entire pack held their breath. Kaelin turned his attention back to Elara. She was still kneeling in the mud, her white healer's cloak torn and soaked through. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks by the snow, and blood trickled slowly from her scraped knees. Yet, her forest-green eyes did not hold the terror of a broken Omega. She looked up at him with a sharp, calculating intelligence. The scent of crushed sage and rain hit Kaelin again, so potent and pure that his inner beast roared against the confines of his ribs, demanding he claim her immediately. Elara felt it too. The moment his shadow fell over her, the small moon-glass vial resting against her collarbone grew inexplicably warm. It was a comforting heat, a stark contrast to the biting winter wind. She looked into those piercing violet eyes and saw a flicker of recognition. The broad shoulders, the straight nose with the slight bump at the bridge. He was the wounded, masked stranger she had treated in secret at the border. Kaelin did not offer her empty pity. He reached up and unclasped the heavy direwolf pelt from his shoulders. With slow, deliberate movements, the Lycan King draped his royal iron-gray cloak around Elara's shivering frame. The thick fur was incredibly warm, smelling intensely of cedar, cold iron, and his absolute authority. It swallowed her fragile figure entirely, instantly shielding her from the biting frost and the mocking stares of the pack. "You are bleeding," Kaelin stated, his eyes dropping to her bruised knees. "It is only a scratch, Your Majesty," Elara replied, her voice remarkably steady. She gripped the edges of his royal cloak. Refusing to play the role of a helpless victim, she planted her boots in the mud and forced herself to stand. Her knees ached terribly, but she locked her jaw and rose to her full height, standing shoulder to shoulder with the towering king. Kaelin's eyes flared with a deep, silent approval. She had dignity. She was a true queen. Thorne, still kneeling in the mud, finally found his voice, though it squeaked pitifully. "My king, she is an exile. She is a barren failure who brings a curse upon the harvest. The laws of the ancestors—" "Do not lecture me on the laws of the ancestors, boy," Kaelin interrupted, not even bothering to look at Thorne. His gaze remained fixated on Elara, his hand resting lightly but possessively against the small of her back. "You lack the power to judge a true healer's bloodline. Your ignorance is a rot upon this territory." The king guided Elara toward the massive iron carriage. His guards immediately snapped to attention, opening the heavy door. "She is under the protection of the frost-iron crown," Kaelin announced to the silent, terrified courtyard. He paused at the carriage steps, finally casting a look over his shoulder at Thorne. "If I find that her medical records were tampered with, Alpha Thorne, you will pray for the winter to take you before I do." Without another word, Kaelin helped Elara into the warm, velvet-lined interior of the carriage. The iron doors slammed shut, sealing her away from the pack that had discarded her. The interior of the iron carriage was a sanctuary of heat and thick velvet, completely isolating them from the howling blizzard outside. A small, enchanted hearth burned quietly in the corner, filling the space with the rich, grounding scent of cedar and aged leather. Elara sat on the plush leather bench, still wrapped in King Kaelin's heavy direwolf cloak. The immense garment swallowed her slender frame, trapping his dominant, comforting heat against her skin. Across from her sat the sovereign of the Frost Iron Empire. In the enclosed space, Kaelin's massive build was even more intimidating, yet he kept himself perfectly still, offering her the space a wounded creature needed to breathe. Without a word, Kaelin reached into a compartment beneath his seat. He pulled out a clean linen cloth and a small flask of clear medicinal spirit. He offered them to her, a silent gesture acknowledging her pride. He would not treat her like a helpless child. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Elara murmured. She took the cloth, applied the spirit, and carefully cleaned the dried blood from her scraped knees. She did not wince. Kaelin watched her, his violet eyes tracking the steady, capable movements of her hands. "You did not cry when he stripped you of your name. Tears are for things of value," Elara replied quietly, folding the stained cloth. "Alpha Thorne's pride is not worth weeping over. He threw me out because my presence reminded the pack of his own insecurities." A shadow of a smile, dark and dangerous, touched the corner of Kaelin's mouth. "You possess a sharp mind, Elara of Oakhaven. It is a rare weapon." Elara looked up, her forest green eyes meeting his. "You know my bloodline. I know the bloodline of the woman who saved my life," Kaelin stated, his deep voice filling the carriage. 3 weeks ago, near the southern ridge, I was heavily poisoned by a rogue faction using silver ash arrows. My Lycan healing factor was dormant. I was dying in the mud, much like you were today. You found me. You bound my wounds and fed me a tincture that neutralized the silver in my veins. Elara's fingers instinctively brushed the moonglass vial resting against her collarbone. "I am a healer. I treat the wounded. But you were masked. I did not know I was treating the king. And Thorne did not know his wife was slipping out of his bed to act as a battlefield medic," Kaelin observed, his jaw tightening slightly at the mention of her status as another man's wife. "You healed a curse in my blood that the greatest royal physicians deemed incurable. You breathed life back into a dead bloodline, Elara." As he spoke, a sudden, profound heat radiated from Elara's chest. The moonglass vial, pressed against her skin under his heavy cloak, began to hum. It was barely perceptible, a faint thrumming that matched the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Looking down, she gasped softly. Deep within the opaque glass, a tiny, swirling spark of royal blue light had ignited. The ancient texts of her ancestors flashed through her mind. "The glass of the moon shall only glow with the blue of the sky when the blood of a true Lycan King takes root." A heavy, exhausting sickness had plagued her for the past 2 weeks. She had assumed it was the stress of Vesper's arrival and Thorne's blatant infidelity. But now, sitting across from the man whose scent of rain and iron made her inner wolf purr in absolute submission, the truth settled into her bones. She wasn't Barren. She never was. The intense, life-saving magic she had performed on Kaelin that night in the dark had forged a bond deeper than a simple bite. It had bypassed Thorne's weak, superficial mating mark entirely. She was carrying the royal heir. Elara quickly pulled the thick edges of the iron-gray cloak closer together, hiding the glowing vial from Kaelin's view. She needed absolute, undeniable medical proof before she presented this truth to the court. She would not act on instinct alone. She would act with flawless, legally binding evidence. Kaelin noticed her sudden movement. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his alpha aura pressing gently against her senses to soothe, not to demand. "Are you in pain?" "No," Elara breathed out, the warmth in her stomach growing stronger, validating her existence. "I am realizing certain truths, Your Majesty." "Then realize this," Kaelin said, his violet eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, uncompromising promise. "You are no longer an outcast. You are a guest of the Frost Iron Crown. Alpha Thorne cast you out on the grounds of barrenness. We will see how his claims hold up against the scrutiny of the Royal Medical Chamber. The carriage suddenly decelerated, the iron wheels grinding against a paved stone path. The blizzard outside seemed to quiet down, blocked by massive architectural walls. "We have arrived," Kaelin announced, standing up. "Welcome to the Obsidian Tribunal, Elara. Let them look at you and wonder why the king's cloak rests upon your shoulders." The iron doors of the carriage swung open, letting in the crisp, icy air of the high mountains. The Frost Iron Empire's capital was a fortress carved directly into the dark peaks, a masterpiece of towering black marble and blazing silver torches. King Kaelin stepped out first. His boots hit the polished stone courtyard with a heavy, commanding thud. A battalion of the Royal Guard immediately slammed the butts of their halberds against the ground in a unified, deafening salute. Kaelin turned and extended his large, leather-gloved hand toward the carriage interior. Elara hesitated for only a fraction of a second. She placed her small, pale hand into his. The spark of heat that shot up her arm was instantaneous, a sharp reminder of the blood resonance binding them together. Kaelin's grip was firm and steady, pulling her out of the carriage and into the glaring light of the royal court. The great hall of the Obsidian Tribunal was vast, lined with towering pillars of dark stone. Hundreds of courtiers, aristocrats, and high-ranking generals populated the space. As Kaelin led Elara up the grand steps, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the hall. The courtiers stared. They saw the Lycan King, a man known for his ruthless detachment, gently guiding a woman who looked like a battlefield casualty. Her white dress was torn at the hem. Her dark hair was damp from the snow. But worst of all, she was wrapped in the king's personal direwolf mantle. The whispers began immediately, hissing through the hall like venomous snakes. "Is that the healer from Oakhaven? Alpha Thorne's barren wife? A disgraced exile in the inner sanctum?" Elara kept her chin high. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of quiet composure. She was a healer. She was used to assessing hostile environments and stabilizing the bleeding. Right now, her pride was bleeding, and she would not let them see it. She felt the warmth of the moon-glass vial against her chest, drawing strength from the secret life growing within her. From the sea of whispering nobles, High Elder Vance stepped forward. He was a tall, skeletal man, draped in the heavy silver chains of the Royal Council, his face deeply lined with years of political maneuvering. "Your Majesty," Vance began, bowing stiffly. His pale eyes flicked to Elara with thinly veiled disdain. "We rejoice at your safe return. However, it is highly unprecedented to bring a marked exile into the tribunal. Pack law dictates that a Luna rejected for infertility must seek penance in the outer wastes, not the royal court." Kaelin stopped. The temperature in the massive hall seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. He did not raise his voice, but the sheer, oppressive weight of his alpha aura forced several nearby nobles to their knees. "I set the precedent in this empire. Vance." Kaelin's voice echoed off the black marble. "Not you." Before the High Elder could stammer an apology, Elara stepped forward, moving out slightly from behind the king's massive frame. She did not raise her voice, but her tone was clear and authoritative. "By the edict of the first moon, High Elder," Elara spoke, the ancient legal text rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "A healer of an established bloodline who is unjustly stripped of her pack may seek asylum at the highest medical authority in the land. I am not here as a disgraced wife. I am here as a medical practitioner of House Oakhaven, seeking the judgment of the Royal Medical Chamber." The court went dead silent. The nobles exchanged shocked glances. A rejected female was supposed to weep and beg, not quote high-pack law with the precision of a royal scholar. Kaelin looked down at her, a fierce, undeniable pride burning in his violet eyes. He turned his gaze back to the High Elder. "The lady speaks the law," Kaelin stated, a lethal edge to his tone. "She is a guest of the crown. Anyone who questions her presence will answer to my blade." Vance swallowed hard, stepping back and bowing deeply. "Understood, my king." Just as the tension in the hall began to settle, the heavy bronze doors at the far end of the tribunal burst open. A royal messenger sprinted across the black marble. dropping to one knee before the king. "Your Majesty, an urgent missive from the southern borders." The messenger gasped for breath, holding up a wax-sealed scroll. "Alpha Thorne of the Riverbend Pack has crossed the royal gates. His harvest has frozen over. He comes seeking emergency winter rations and to officially register the banishment of his former mate to secure his new heir's succession." Elara's breath hitched. Thorne was coming here. He and Vesper were walking right into the royal capital. Kaelin took the scroll, his thumb running over the broken wax seal. A terrifying, beautiful smirk curved the Lycan King's lips. He looked at Elara, his violet eyes promising absolute devastation for her enemies. "Prepare the guest chambers," Kaelin commanded, his voice echoing with dark anticipation. "Let the foolish Alpha come. He is about to learn what happens when you throw away a queen." From the high balcony of the king's private solar, Elara looked down into the lower courtyard of the Obsidian Tribunal. The blizzard had broken, leaving the fortress encased in a blinding, crystalline layer of frost. Below, a miserable procession was making its way through the heavily guarded gates. Alpha Thorne's carriage was battered, its wooden frame splintered by the harsh northern winds. Thorne stepped out, looking thoroughly haggard. His golden fur mantle was matted with sleet, and his shoulders were slumped with the exhaustion of a failing leader. He reached back to help Vesper out of the carriage. She shivered violently in her crimson silks, dramatically clutching her slightly rounded stomach as she leaned heavily against him. They looked exactly like what they were: desperate fools who had sacrificed their pack's stability for a lie. "They arrived less than an hour ago." King Kaelin's deep voice resonated from the doorway behind her. Elara turned. The Lycan King walked into the solar, his presence instantly warming the room. He had changed from his heavy traveling furs into a tailored black tunic lined with silver thread, the royal signet ring gleaming on his index finger. In his left hand, he held a tightly rolled parchment bound by a red wax seal. "He wasted no time," Kaelin continued, stopping beside her at the balcony. His violet eyes tracked Thorne's movements below with absolute disgust. "He has already submitted his formal petition to the High Elder. He is begging for a royal grain convoy to save his starving people." "And the banishment decree?" Elara asked, her voice steady. Kaelin handed her the parchment, a copy of what he submitted to the royal clerks. Read it. Elara unrolled the heavy paper. The scent of cheap ink and Thorne's arrogant musk drifted from it. It was a formal medical decree, signed by Elder Silas, the chief physician of the Riverbend Pack. The words jumped out at her, dripping with fabricated malice. A withered womb, an unnatural biological defect, a danger to the Pack's prosperity. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the parchment. For a brief second, the old shame tried to creep up her throat, the ghost of 3 years of whispers and pitiful stares. But then, she felt the solid, unyielding heat of Kaelin's arm brushing against hers, and the warm thrum of the moon-glass vial resting over her collarbone. "Elder Silas was bought," Elara stated, her green eyes narrowing as she analyzed the document. "This diagnosis claims a complete failure of the reproductive system, but the methodology is entirely absent. No blood resonance test was recorded. No moon cycle tracking. It is a legal impossibility under ancient Lycan medical law. It is a forgery designed to legally strip you of your assets and elevate a rogue's bastard to the status of a pack heir," Kaelin growled, the shadows in the room seeming to deepen with his rising anger. "Attempting to file a forged legal document with the crown is an act of treason. By doing this, Thorne has handed me the blade for his own execution." "Why did you not stop him at the gates?" Elara asked, looking up at the towering sovereign. "Because a quick death in the courtyard is too merciful for a man who threw my mate into the snow," Kaelin replied smoothly, his violet eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying, absolute promise of justice. "Thorne is a man built on public pride. Therefore, he must be unmade in public. I want him to stand before the entire tribunal tomorrow morning and read this lie out loud. I want him to believe he has won." The sheer political ruthlessness in Kaelin's strategy sent a shiver down Elara's spine, not of fear, but of profound respect. He wasn't just a beast of war. He was a master of the court. Kaelin reached out, his large, calloused fingers gently taking the forged decree from her hands. His touch lingered, a deliberate spark of heat passing between them. But before we let the fool speak, we must secure our own undeniable truth. Words and logic are powerful, Elara, but the High Council requires physical proof to overturn an Alpha's decree. Elara nodded, her hand instinctively rising to cover the moon-glass vial beneath her dress. The Royal Medical Chamber. Exactly, Kaelin said. He offered her his arm, a gesture of deep respect, not just protection. Come, let us see what the ancient magic of your ancestors has to say about the barren Luna of Riverbend. They walked out of the solar together, moving through the silent, torchlit corridors of the keep. The deeper they descended into the fortress, the heavier the air became, thick with the scent of old herbs, burning myrrh, and ancient magic. Finally, they stood before a pair of massive bronze doors etched with the intricate anatomical diagrams of lycanthropy and moon phase cycles. The Royal Medical Chamber. Kaelin placed his hand against the heavy metal, pushing the doors open. Are you ready, my queen? Elara took a deep breath, the scent of crushed sage rising in the air. I am. The Royal Medical Chamber was a vast, circular room built from smooth obsidian and white marble. The air smelled sharply of antiseptic herbs, crushed mint, and the ozone tang of ancient magic. Silver surgical instruments and rows of glowing crystal vials lined the walls, but the center of the room was dominated by a large, polished stone diagnostic table. Standing by the table was Master Eris, the chief royal physician. He was an elderly Lycan with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. As King Kaelin and Elara entered, he immediately dropped into a deep bow. Your Majesty, Master Eris said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. He looked at Elara, noting the frayed white healer's cloak beneath the king's heavy mantle. How may the medical chamber serve the crown? Master Eris, Kaelin began, his voice commanding but devoid of its usual lethal edge. Lady Elara of House Oakhaven requires a blood resonance test. Official and documented. Master Eris's eyes widened slightly at the mention of her bloodline, House Oakhaven. It is an honor, my lady. The ancient texts speak highly of your family's diagnostic arts. Thank you, Master Eris, Elara replied, stepping forward. The calm, authoritative demeanor of a healer fully possessed her now. This was her domain. She reached under the collar of her dress and unhooked the leather cord, bringing forth the moon-glass vial. The old physician gasped, stepping closer to examine the opaque, milky glass without touching it. A true moon glass. I have not seen one in over a century. A flawless instrument of biological truth. Alpha Thorne of Riverbend has filed a decree claiming I am entirely barren, Elara stated, her tone clinical and detached, though her heart beat a rapid rhythm against her ribs. We are here to prove the forgery. Master Eris nodded gravely, retrieving a small silver lancet and a clean crystal basin. If you please, my lady. Elara took the lancet. She did not flinch. With a quick, practiced motion, she pricked the tip of her index finger. A single drop of crimson blood welled up. She held her hand over the moon-glass vial and let the drop fall into the narrow opening. The moment her blood touched the bottom of the glass, the vial emitted a low, resonant hum. The milky opacity began to swirl, turning a faint, pearlescent pink. It was alive, waiting for the catalyst. Elara looked up at Kaelin. Your Majesty. Kaelin stepped forward. He did not bother with the lancet. He drew the sharp edge of his royal signet ring across his palm, creating a shallow, precise cut. He held his massive, scarred hand over the vial, allowing a single drop of his dark Lycan blood to fall and mix with hers. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The faint pink swirl within the glass violently vanished. The vial turned completely transparent for a heartbeat, and then it ignited. A blinding, radiant royal blue light erupted from the glass, illuminating the entire chamber in a sapphire glow. The hum grew into a melodic vibration that resonated in the teeth and bones of everyone in the room. Master Eris stumbled backward, his hands flying to his mouth in sheer, unadulterated shock. By the goddess, the resonance is absolute. a perfect genetic match. Kaelin stopped breathing. The Lycan King, the most feared warlord in the northern reaches, stood completely frozen. He stared at the glowing blue vial, the undeniable proof of his legacy. The Frost Iron royal bloodline was notoriously difficult to propagate. Many believed his specific lineage was cursed to end with him due to the silver poison he had endured years ago. Slowly, Kaelin raised his eyes from the vial to Elara's stomach. "An heir," Kaelin whispered, the words barely making it past his throat. Elara looked up at him, the blue light reflecting in her forest-green eyes. "Your heir, Kaelin. The poison did not kill your lineage. The magic we shared. It bypassed every physical limitation." Kaelin moved. It wasn't a slow, calculated movement of a king. It was the desperate, visceral motion of a mate. He closed the distance between them, his large hands reaching out to cup her face. His thumbs gently brushed her cheekbones, his violet eyes completely stripped of their cold armor, revealing a raw, overwhelming awe. "He called you a withered branch," Kaelin murmured, his voice thick with emotion, before his gaze hardened into dark, protective fury. He threw the mother of the Frost Iron Empire into the mud. "He was blind," Elara said softly, her hands resting over his wrists. "But the court will not be." Kaelin turned his head to look at the chief royal physician, who was hastily documenting the glowing vial's reaction into the official royal ledger. "Master Heiress," the king ordered, his voice returning to its booming, authoritative register. "Draft the medical certification. Stamp it with the high seal of the medical chamber. Tomorrow, when the sun reaches its peak, you will bring this vial and your ledger to the Obsidian Tribunal." "It shall be done, Your Majesty." Master Heiress bowed, his hands trembling with the historical weight of what he had just witnessed. Kaelin looked back down at Elara, his thumb tracing her jawline. "Rest tonight, Elara. Tomorrow you will wear the colors of my court, and we will watch Thorne dig his own grave." When the sun reached its peak, the great bronze doors of the Obsidian Tribunal slammed shut, sealing the massive hall. Hundreds of lords, generals, and scholars filled the tiered stone benches, their eyes fixed on the black marble dais at the center of the room. At the head of the hall, upon a throne forged from jagged iron and obsidian, sat King Kaelin. He wore his full royal regalia, an imposing figure of lethal stillness. To his immediate right, partially concealed by the shadow of a massive stone pillar, stood Elara. She no longer wore the torn, blood-stained cloak of a banished healer. She was dressed in an elegant gown of deep iron gray and silver, the colors of the Frost Iron Court. Her dark hair woven with a simple silver chain. She looked every inch a queen waiting to claim her crown. Below the dais, Alpha Thorne and Vesper knelt on the cold stone floor. Thorne looked nervous, but hopeful, clutching the sealed parchment to his chest. Vesper, draped in excessive crimson velvet, kept her hand firmly plastered to her stomach, playing the role of the exhausted, pregnant Luna. Alpha Thorne of Riverbend, High Elder Vance's voice echoed across the quiet hall. "You have petitioned the crown for emergency winter grain, citing a failing harvest. You have also submitted a legal decree of banishment regarding your former mate. Step forward and present your case to the sovereign." Thorne stood, clearing his throat and puffing out his chest to project an air of authority he did not possess. "Your Majesty," Thorne began, bowing low, "my pack suffers, but not due to poor leadership. We were cursed. For 3 winters, my former mate, Elara of Oakhaven, polluted our lands with her biological failure. She is completely barren, a withered womb that brought famine to my borders." A quiet murmur rippled through the gallery. Thorne, mistaking the tension for sympathy, raised his voice, gesturing to Vesper. "But the goddess is just. I took a new mate, Vesper, and within 3 moons she proved her fertility. She carries the true heir of Riverbend. I have filed the official medical decree from my pack physician, Elder Silas, to legally dissolve my previous bond and cast the barren failure out into the wastes." Thorne held up the forged decree like a trophy. On the throne, King Kaelin did not blink. His violet eyes were fixed on Thorne with the cold detachment of a butcher analyzing a slab of meat. "You present this medical decree as absolute truth?" Kaelin's voice was a low rumble, but it carried effortlessly to every corner of the vast hall. "I swear it upon my life, Your Majesty," Thorne declared confidently. "The Oakhaven healer was a fraud. Let the court hear the fraud speak for herself." "Then," Kaelin commanded. From the shadows of the pillar, Elara stepped into the glaring light of the tribunal. The murmurs in the gallery instantly died. The lords and generals stared in absolute shock. The woman they had seen yesterday, bleeding and wrapped in the king's cloak, was now radiating a quiet, undeniable authority, dressed in the royal colors. Thorne froze, his jaw going slack. The color completely drained from his face, as his brain struggled to comprehend why the woman he had thrown into the mud was standing on the royal dais beside the Lycan King. "Elara?" Thorne choked out, taking a step back. What is the meaning of this? Why is a rogue standing near the throne?" "I am no rogue, Thorne," Elara said, her voice clear, calm, and ringing with dignity. She slowly descended the first 3 steps of the dais, the silver fabric of her dress pooling around her boots. "I am a healer of House Oakhaven, and I am here to challenge the validity of your decree under the ancient medical laws of the Frost Iron Empire." Vesper let out a sharp gasp, gripping Thorne's arm tightly. "Alpha, make them remove her. She's lying." "Silence," Kaelin commanded. The single word hit the room like a physical blow. Vesper clamped her mouth shut, trembling. Elara did not even glance at the false Luna. She kept her green eyes locked on her ex-mate. "Your decree claims a complete failure of my reproductive system, diagnosed by Elder Silas. Yet, no blood resonance test was ever performed on me. Do you know why, Thorne?" Thorne swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "Elder Silas. He did not need to. The proof was 3 years of empty cribs. Elder Silas did not perform the test because you paid him a heavy sum of silver to forge the document without it," Elara stated, her words slicing through his defense with clinical precision. "A blood resonance test does not just identify fertility. It identifies the exact source of the failure." Elara stopped at the bottom of the steps, standing only a few feet away from the trembling Alpha. She raised her chin, her gaze piercing through his pathetic facade. "I was never barren, Thorne," Elara declared, her voice echoing off the black marble. She turned her attention to the king. "Your Majesty, I formally request that the chief royal physician conduct a blood resonance test on Alpha Thorne and his new Luna right here, before the High Court." Thorne stumbled backward, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. "No, that is highly irregular. My privacy? You forfeited your privacy when you brought a forged document into my court," King Kaelin interrupted, leaning forward on his throne, his violet eyes blazing with dark anticipation. He raised his hand, signaling the heavy bronze doors at the side of the hall to open. "Bring out the resonance glass." The side doors of the tribunal hall opened, and Master Heiress, the chief royal physician, walked out, flanked by 2 heavily armored royal guards. In his hands, he carried a large, clear resonance crystal, resting on a silver pedestal. Thorne scrambled backward on his hands and knees, shaking his head wildly. "No! I am an alpha of a sovereign pack. You cannot force me to bleed like a common criminal. You submitted a fraudulent medical decree to the crown to steal winter rations." King Kaelin's voice cracked like a whip, instantly freezing Thorne in his tracks. "That makes you exactly that, a common criminal. Bleed, Thorne, or my guards will take the blood from your neck." 2 royal guards stepped forward, their halberds lowering until the sharp steel hovered mere inches from Thorne's throat. Trembling uncontrollably, Thorne extended a shaking hand. Master Heiress stepped forward, his face an emotionless mask of professional duty. With a quick prick of a silver lancet, he drew a single drop of blood from Thorne's finger, letting it fall onto the clear resonance crystal. The entire hall leaned in. The silence was so profound that one could hear the heavy, frantic breathing of Vesper. The crystal absorbed Thorne's blood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sickly, dull gray cloud began to spread through the pristine stone. It looked like dead ash, devoid of any warmth, light, or magic. The crystal grew cold, the edges frosting over with a lifeless, brittle layer. Master Heiress adjusted his spectacles, examining the reaction carefully before turning to face the throne. The resonance is utterly dead. Your Majesty, Master Heiress announced, his voice carrying clearly to the highest tiers of the gallery. There is zero Lycan viability. Alpha Thorne is completely, irreversibly sterile. He has possessed no capacity to create life since birth. A collective gasp echoed through the Obsidian Tribunal. Lords covered their mouths. Generals shook their heads in disgust. Thorne stared at the gray crystal, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. No, no, that is a trick. It's a trick. Look at Vesper. She is with Pup. The child is mine. Master Heiress did not argue. He simply turned to Vesper, extending the silver lancet. Vesper burst into hysterical tears, pressing her back against the cold stone floor, trying to scramble away. No, please, I didn't know. He offered me silk and status. Hold her, Kaelin commanded. A guard firmly gripped Vesper's wrist, allowing Master Heiress to prick her finger. The drop of blood fell onto a second section of the crystal. Instantly, the stone flared with a murky, muddy brownish-green light. A stark, undeniable contrast to Thorne's dead gray. The woman is indeed pregnant, Master Heiress diagnosed clinically. However, the genetic marker belongs to a southern marsh rogue. It holds absolutely no biological connection to Alpha Thorne. The bloodlines are entirely mismatched. The lie was broken. The truth lay bare on the silver pedestal for the entire Frost Iron Empire to see. Thorne looked like a man who had just been gutted alive without a blade. His golden hair was matted with sweat, his eyes wide with a frantic, shattered realization. He turned to look at Vesper, who was sobbing into her hands, completely ruining her facade of the proud Luna. You, Thorne choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. You lied to me. You carry a rogue's bastard. You lied to yourself, Thorne, Elara said. Her voice was quiet, yet it commanded the attention of the entire room. She looked down at him with nothing but clinical detachment. You paid Elder Silas to brand me as Barren because you were too cowardly to face your own inadequacy. You threw me into a blizzard to freeze to death so you could harbor a rogue's child and protect your fragile, pathetic pride. Thorne collapsed onto his hands, openly weeping against the black marble floor. His entire world, his pack, his legacy, his ego had been dismantled in a matter of minutes by the very woman he had called a withered branch. My king, Thorne sobbed, crawling desperately toward the dais, though the guards immediately crossed their halberds to stop him. Mercy, I was deceived. I was desperate for an heir. King Kaelin slowly stood up from his throne of obsidian and iron. When the Lycan King rose, the entire hall seemed to darken, the shadows stretching across the floor as his suffocating alpha aura filled every inch of the room. You cast out a healer of an ancient bloodline to die in the snow, Kaelin stated, descending the first 2 steps of the dais. He stopped beside Elara, his massive presence standing in absolute solidarity with her. You broke the sacred laws of the goddess to feed your own vanity. But your greatest crime, Thorne, Kaelin reached out, his large, scarred hand gently resting over Elara's stomach, was attempting to murder the mother of the Frost Iron heir. The words hung in the cold air of the Obsidian Tribunal, heavy and absolute. For a long, agonizing moment, the hall was so quiet one could hear the torches crackling against the black marble pillars. Then, Master Heiress stepped forward, pulling a velvet cloth away from a second pedestal. Resting upon it was the moon glass vial Elara had used the night before, still emitting that blinding, undeniable royal blue light. The blood resonance is a perfect match, Master Heiress declared to the stunned court. Lady Elara carries the true bloodline of the Lycan King. Thorne stared at the glowing blue vial, his mind completely fracturing. The woman he had publicly shamed, the woman he had called a withered branch and thrown into the freezing mud, was not only fertile, she was carrying the most powerful bloodline in the known territories. He had literally handed the king's mate over to him. No, Thorne whispered, tears of profound, pathetic despair spilling down his cheeks. He looked up at Elara, crawling forward until the guard's halberds crossed directly at his throat, forcing his chin up. Elara, Please. I did not know. You must tell him to spare me. We were mates. We shared a pack. Elara looked down at the miserable creature trembling at her feet. She felt the heavy, protective warmth of Kaelin standing beside her, his massive frame shielding her from the ghosts of her past. She did not feel anger anymore. She only felt a cold, clinical pity. We shared a pack, Thorne, but we were never mates, Elara said, her voice completely devoid of the warmth he was begging for. You threw me away because your fragile pride could not bear the truth of your own weakness. You did not banish a barren wife. You banished yourself. Thorne opened his mouth to beg again, but King Kaelin raised his hand. The silence that followed was terrifying. The judgment of the Frost Iron Crown is final. Kaelin's voice thundered, vibrating through the stone floor. He looked down at Thorne, his violet eyes burning with the cold fire of a warlord delivering justice. Alpha Thorne, for the crime of forging royal medical decrees and for the attempted murder of the king's mate, I strip you of your alpha status. I strip you of your pack, your lands, and your name. Thorne let out a guttural sob, collapsing onto the floor. You will not be executed, Kaelin continued, his tone merciless. Death is too quick an end for a coward. You will live out the remainder of your days in the deep obsidian mines of the northern peaks. You will dig the very stone that builds my child's kingdom. Vesper screamed as two guards seized her by the arms. Take the false Luna to the outer borders, Kaelin ordered, not even looking at her. Strip her of those stolen silks. When the rogue's child is born, it will be placed in a royal orphanage. She, however, is permanently exiled from the Frost Iron Empire. As Vesper and Thorne were dragged screaming from the tribunal hall, the heavy bronze doors at the back of the room opened. The delegation of elders and warriors from the Riverbend Pack, who had traveled with Thorne to secure the winter grain, were led inside. They had heard everything from the antechamber. Seeing their alpha stripped of his power and dragged away in chains, the Riverbend wolves immediately dropped to their knees. They bowed their heads to the cold stone, their bodies trembling in profound regret and fear. The very pack that had stood by and watched Elara bleed in the snow was now kneeling at her feet, entirely at her mercy. Kaelin looked down at the kneeling wolves, then turned to Elara. His alpha aura softened, wrapping around her in a protective, grounding embrace. The scent of rain and cedar intertwined beautifully with her crushed sage, signaling to every Lycan in the room that the true bond had been acknowledged. The Riverbend Pack is now property of the crown, Kaelin announced to the hall, though his eyes never left Elara's face. They will be fed, and they will be given a new governor. A governor chosen by my queen. The entire tribunal hall, hundreds of the most powerful lords and generals of the north, realized what was happening. As one, following the example of the Riverbend wolves, the royal court of the Obsidian Tribunal dropped to their knees in absolute submission. Kaelin took Elara's hand, lifting it to his lips. He kissed the back of her hand, a gesture of deep, unyielding respect. The lies are broken. Elara, the Lycan King whispered, his eyes glowing with the promise of a new dawn. It is time to take your throne. Elara stood before the obsidian throne, looking out over the sea of kneeling lords, generals, and the remnants of the pack that had once cast her aside. The air in the tribunal hall was thick with reverence, the scent of crushed sage and rain completely dominating the massive space. She did not feel the bitter sting of the winter wind anymore. She did not feel the ache of her scraped knees, or the sharp sting of Thorne's cruel words. The memory of the mud and the blizzard felt like a distant nightmare, completely dissolved by the undeniable, radiant truth of her own bloodline. King Kaelin stood beside her, a towering monument of strength and absolute authority. He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. His large, scarred thumbs gently traced the knuckles of her fingers. You came to my empire wrapped in a torn cloak, seeking only the truth, Kaelin said, his voice softer now, meant only for her, though the silence in the hall was so absolute that the nearest elders hung on to every word. You did not ask for a crown. You asked for justice. And you gave me both, Kaelin, Elara replied softly, a genuine, radiant smile finally breaking through her clinical composure. Kaelin reached up, signaling to High Elder Vance. The old man practically scrambled to obey, coming forward with a velvet cushion. Resting upon it was the Luna crown of the Frost Iron Empire, a delicate but formidable weave of dark silver and sapphires. Kaelin lifted the crown. He did not ask the High Elder to perform the coronation. The Lycan King would do it himself. The Frost Iron Empire is a land forged in ice and war, Kaelin announced, his voice booming across the hall, addressing his people. We value strength above all else, but today we have learned that the greatest strength does not lie in a blade or in the arrogant pride of foolish men. It lies in the quiet dignity of a healer who refused to be broken by a lie. He stepped closer to Elara, his violet eyes locking onto her green ones, with a love so fierce it made her breath hitch. "Long live Queen Elara," Kaelin declared, gently placing the silver crown upon her dark hair. "The mother of the northern reaches, the savior of the Frost Iron bloodline. Long live the queen!" The court erupted, the roar of hundreds of Lycans shaking the very foundations of the Obsidian Keep. The Riverbend wolves bowed their heads lower, weeping in profound regret for the jewel they had thrown away, completely at the mercy of the woman they had called Barren. Months later, the brutal winter finally broke, giving way to the first warm sunlight of spring. In the royal nursery, high within the safest tower of the Obsidian Keep, the sharp, healthy cry of a newborn shattered the quiet morning. Elara lay back against the plush pillows of the massive four-poster bed, exhausted but glowing with an ethereal, maternal warmth. Kaelin sat on the edge of the mattress. The terrifying warlord, the man who had brought a sovereign pack to its knees with a single command, was holding a tiny bundle of silver blankets with infinite, trembling care. The royal heir had been born. A boy, strong and loud, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were already beginning to shift into a piercing, familiar violet. Kaelin leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to Elara's forehead. He rested his cheek against hers, listening to the dual heartbeats of his family, a sound he had believed he would never hear. On a small silver table beside the crib, resting on a velvet cushion, sat the moon glass vial. It was quiet now, its milky surface calm, having served its ancient purpose. It had proven a mother's worth, exposed a coward's lie, and given a dying empire its greatest miracle. The Barren Luna was dead. The White Queen of the Frost Iron Empire had risen, and her legacy would reign for 1,000 years. A true queen is not made by a crown, but by the dignity she holds when everything else is stripped away. Do you think Thorne's punishment in the deep obsidian mines was the perfect justice for a man who destroyed his own pack out of pure pride? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more Alpha King and rejected Luna stories filled with undeniable truth, protective mates, and royal justice. Stay with us and come back for the next story.